Tadakuda suspects that his seemingly younger appearing cousin Martin is a vampire. Shy and withdrawn on the surface, Martin preys on young women, sedating them with an unnamed anesthetic, drawing blood from their veins, drinking it, while taking advantage of their unconscious bodies. His actions build in body count until he meets depressed housewife Abby, a consensual affair that blooms, steering Martin away from his predatory lust until he craves blood once again. This is George A. Romero's Martin, an underrated entry within the Romero canon, an example of the director's earlier DIY filmmaking efforts, relying on a minuscule budget and a cast of non-professional actors and newcomers. Like the best of George A. Romero's work, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and the equally underestimated The Amusement Park, Martin is a film dripping in social commentary, specifically focused on a depiction of religious persecution, addiction, and sexual entitlement. That's before we even unpack the mystery as to whether Martin is truly a vampire or not. It's not an understatement to say Martin is addicted to blood. His desperation for blood resorts to terrible actions of home invasion and sexual assault. Without blood, Martin admits he gets shaky and dizzy, symptoms of withdrawal. It's no coincidence that Martin also relies on a small kit of needles to acquire his blood by sedating his victims. The imagery itself of needles kept within a minuscule paraphernalia kit reminiscent of discreetly held drug preparation methods. It's not a stretch to say that Martin relies on a bloodlust to function, developing a routine-like dependency for violence, an addiction. While Martin's actions are brutal and his invasion of consensual barriers isn't excusable, George A. Romero presents the audience with a character who stems from a source of destructive vulnerability, a person who is willing to destroy another for his own sense of functionality. It may be that Romero suggests that Martin, despite his actions, is a character to be pitied for what he wreaks onto others for his own unending dependencies. Religious persecution is also prominent within Romero's film, specifically in the resentful relationship Tadakuda has with Martin. Tadakuda is a staunchly religious man, and with his firmly held set of beliefs chastises Martin for being a Nosferatu, a vampire. It's Tadakuda's dedication, maybe even his own dependency, on faith, that results in actions veering towards the paranoid. Garlic left to hang on doors, a bell trap which makes it known when Martin enters and leaves his bedroom, and even an attempt to exorcise the evil from Martin's body with the help of a clergyman. Romero's film is certainly unafraid of aiming criticism of the aggressive forms of blind faith, which so willingly chastise and marginalise others for any slight difference. Whether Tadakuda is right or wrong to allege that his cousin is a vampire, what Romero's film takes umbrage with is the suspension of rationality inherent in more bigoted branches of organised faith, which so favours superstition and conspiracy. Before delving further into the central mystery of Martin himself, we need to acknowledge the predatory nature of his actions. Martin is an outsider, but not an admirable one. His shyness hides the underlying sexual entitlement he holds dear, the expectation that he can't get sex from someone willing, so he'll take it from the unwilling instead. Martin's action of bloodletting is inherently sexual, as it's often accompanied by groping, stripping, and kissing his unconscious victims. Even the action of a vampire sucking blood, if Martin is in fact a vampire, is a sexual one. The draining of something private from another person through an intimate orifice, as if deeply kissing them, is certainly drenched in sexuality. As Martin relies on taking advantage of others physically and forcefully, his sexual urges are less similar to the notion of romanticised, sexually liberated vampires, and more akin to the violent male expectations that view women for their own sexual gratification, sheer objectification. Within this predatory behaviour, we should ask, is Martin truly a vampire or not? If Martin is simply a predator with resentment issues, is that vampiric in of itself? Throughout Romero's film, these rhetoric questions arise, as Martin's behaviour isn't exactly the same as the vampires we've seen in movies or read about in books, but Martin acknowledges that real-world vampires don't follow the stereotypes. George A. Romero is intentionally challenging our assumptions surrounding the tropes of vampirism with Martin, forcing us to acknowledge that not all potential threats will conform to our preconceptions. If Martin is truly a vampire, he's not like any vampire we've seen before. The plausibility is certainly there. Tadakuda is his cousin, but Martin doesn't seem to have aged like Tada. Martin often has flashbacks or hallucinations of a distant past, where he preyed on women he found attractive, and was previously a target of angry mobs and religious exorcism. There are clues to suggest that Martin is a vampire, but even if he wasn't, his sexually predatory actions serve as enough of a threat that vampirism becomes almost irrelevant. Martin is an encapsulation of male violence towards women and those closest to them. To answer it all simply, is Martin truly a vampire? Does it even matter? In conclusion, George A. Romero's Martin serves as a testament to the filmmaker's earlier independent DIY craft, a sharp modernisation on vampiric folklore that takes into account the fear women have of male violence, as well as the increasing isolation which leads young men like Martin down the path of entitlement and dependency. Critiquing societal issues while retaining an element of the ambiguous surrounding Martin's vampiric nature, George A. Romero's Martin is a vampire gem unlike anything you've seen before. A special thank you to my incredible tier Patreon supporter Gil, and my super tier Patreon supporters Konstantin Pombelli, Jamie, and Anthony Orr.